Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Leisure Suit Larry 1 in the land of the Lounge Lizards for several PC systems of the late 80s, early 90s, but the biggest two versions being on DOS, Amiga, and Apple II. This is a classic Sierra adventure from 1987 that was first released as a parser-based game, and then it was later re-released in 1991 as a point-and-click game with enhanced visuals as well as the slight altering of a couple of scenes. But the content between them is actually exactly the same. The difference being, like I said, the visuals were different in the remake, and there was one particular scene I know that was altered in the remake, and I actually think it's funnier than the original. But suffice to say, this game was released with almost no advertising campaign, and a lot of stores even refused to stock it altogether because it was a mature-oriented game with sexual content in it. And I know a lot of people look at that today and be like, really? You guys were freaking out about this? Well, you have to keep in mind, it's the US, and it was the late 80s, early 90s, and it was a video game. So this was kind of unheard of for the time. It just hadn't really become commonplace. And when the game was finally rated by the ESRB, it just got M. It wasn't that bad, really. But it was like seeing an R-rated movie and having one of the first R-rated movies in gaming form. So it was just a weird thing, and people really learned about it by word of mouth, and it spread, and they eventually sold many more copies than they did at the first release, which they didn't sell many at all when it was first released, and then the more people played it, the more it sold, and now it's become an adventure game legend. And of course it spawned an entire series that went Leisure Suit Larry 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, and then they did more modern versions that pretty much sucked. But anyway, the weird thing about this game was that at the time it was just so unusual and kind of controversial. But the real question is it relevant even after all these years? Because it was a product of the times, and there are quite a few things in it that really speak of that. Did all that stand the test of time, or did it just become kind of an anachronism? Well, as far as the presentation goes, it is certainly a product of the times, and it really depends on which version you're playing as to which version actually looks decent. The one you're seeing in this video is the VGA remake, which was 1991, and of course, it just looks far better than the original parser-based version did in 1987, which means that the original version was very pixelated. You could pretty much not even tell what things were in a lot of cases, and they tried to do as best they could with it, but it was still kind of hard to make out what things were. Things were very blocky, and they were very flat in the colors. And the VGA remake has a lot better sprite art you can really tell what things are. It's got this very nice cartoony art style to it that really, really fits it very well. And the visuals themselves are still pretty appealing even after all these years. They've got a nice charm to them. And the original game, well, it just doesn't. So if you're going to play these two versions of the game, I recommend the VGA version if you actually haven't been playing adventure games for a long time and you're not willing to put up with the pretty terrible graphics of the original game. But you do have to keep in mind that they were very limited with what they could do back in 1987, so it's really not their fault that the graphics were as bad as they were. They did what they could with what they had. And so the visuals in the VGA remake are much better. I mean, there's a lot more detail in things. It has much better animations that are much more smooth and fluid, and you can really tell what things are. It's got that nice cartoony art style to it. And the sound design is in general much better. Of course, the original version had PC speaker and really nothing else. Whereas in the VGA remake, they have actual digitized sound, and it sounds pretty good for the most part. I mean, there's obvious sound quality problems from it just being a product of the very early 90s, but other than that, the stuff still sounds good. I mean, they don't have full voice acting or anything, but the sounds they do have fit the game well, and they do everything that they need to be believable. So they did a good job with the presentation in general. And then, of course, there's that iconic theme song, which is kind of this jazz number, and it's just catchy. It gets stuck in your head very easily, and it's just fun. So the presentation still stands the test of time, but what about the story and the gameplay? Well, you're probably familiar with the storyline of this game if you've seen the movie The 40-Year-Old Virgin, because that's pretty much what this thing is. Larry Laffer is a middle-aged virgin, and he goes to Lost Wages, which is, of course, a parody of Las Vegas, and he goes there to basically get laid. That's the entire story of this game, and it's basically his misadventures along the way of getting laid. And so the entire game is just an absurd premise to begin with, and it ends up being pretty hilarious for the most part. That's the whole point of this game. It's not supposed to be taken at all seriously. It's just silly and fun. I mean, Larry goes into town wearing a leisure suit from the 1970s. So he's just this anachronism in this area, and he's really trying his hardest to fit in and be cool and everything, and he's really not. So seeing him fail miserably at a lot of things and just be involved in these ridiculous adventures and such is just funny. And so the game really prides itself on having all of these hilarious jokes, lots of jabs at various things, lots of references and such like that. And they really do create this nice mood to the game where you can't just sit there and be like, this is boring or this is bland or something like that. It's just silly. There's always something ridiculous happening, and you can't help but find it amusing. Now, there are a few parts of this game that do get kind of tedious, but that's only from a gameplay standpoint. Some questionable design decisions. The actual plot elements of this game and the jokes and everything are actually very funny for the most part, and the ones that aren't as funny are still funny. So if you don't find something to laugh at in this game, there's probably something wrong with you, or you just don't understand it at all. I mean, it has even jokes like when you start up the game, it goes through the copy protection stuff, and one of the things is that if you go into this game and you don't know things that an adult of the time would know, then it actually kicks you out of the game and makes you restart it. So it's just funny. So these various things that the game does to just make you laugh and find things amusing and such like that. Now, I do have to say that questionnaire thing at the beginning of the game is kind of a problem if you are unfamiliar with things that were happening at the time, as well as the fact that all of these questions are very US-centric. So if you're from Europe or something like that, then it's probably going to alienate you a bit. You might have to look things up, but back in the day, we didn't have the internet, so it wasn't. I mean, Al Lowe figured that, hey, that they're not going to know this if they're not adults, so he just threw it in there. So yeah, but it's just funny to have that kind of stuff in there. But then you have the gameplay proper, which is your pretty typical Sierra point-and-click game. There are ways you can die in this game, and one of the things you actually get to see with that is if you decide to restart, then it actually will go through this little scene of just how they basically do the restart process, which is Larry's body gets lowered into this blender, and then he gets turned into goo and reconstituted. Or in the original version, he gets put back into the Sierra adventure game Hero Reassembly Factory. It's just funny. So you have those scenes that just tie into the gameplay very well. But for the most part, you're going to be clicking. If you're playing the parser version, you're going to be typing things that like look at object or something like that. Whereas if you're playing the point-and-click game, you're going to be clicking on various things and finding objects to put in your inventory to use on various things, talking to people, that sort of thing. And there's only one issue I have with this. The way they've done this, you actually need money to do certain things in this game. And one of the big problems with this game is having enough money to actually do things. And so what you need to do is you actually need to go to the casino and basically gamble in order to get more money. And it's actually pretty annoying to do that. It's basically grinding in an adventure game, and that really shouldn't happen. But that's really my only issue with this game, actually. Other than that, it's just this funny adventure game from Sierra that really speaks of high-quality work, and it's funny. And that's the whole point. It's not supposed to be this very profound game or anything. It's supposed to be silly and fun. And that's exactly what it is. And so if you're looking for something like that, if you like that sort of humor, where, I do have to say, though, if you've seen the 40-year-old version, that's a stupid movie. And it wasn't funny at all to me, but I found this game hilarious. So be it what you will. That's kind of the thing. And some of the puzzles are a bit convoluted, so that's to be expected of a Sierra adventure game. But still, some of the puzzles may leave you scratching your head a bit, and you might need a walkthrough or something. But it's really a shining example of what makes a good adventure game, and what makes a funny good adventure game. Now, there are other good examples of funny adventure games, like Monkey Island, for instance. But this is one of the ones that it really decided to take that more mature route, and it really pulled it off very well without seeming like it's a gimmick. And they went from Leisure Suit Larry 1 into an entire series that just continuously gets more and more ridiculous as time goes on. The newer games notwithstanding, of course, because they're just dumb. But the ones up through the 90s, I mean, they all fit in very well with this mold. And it's very easy to see why a lot of people consider this one of the greatest adventure games ever made, because there's really not that much wrong with it. And it tried new things, and it was adventurous, and lived up to its name, really. And it was just fun to play. So if you're into adventure games, I very highly recommend this game. If you are looking to get into an adventure game, but you want something that's not at all serious, and you think that this particular premise would be very amusing, then this is definitely a great game for you. But don't go into it expecting it to be easy, and don't go into it expecting that there aren't going to be issues or anything like that, because there are a couple of issues, nothing particularly major. Thanks for watching.